rule reform would have meant APMC Act will be scrapped. Now, unfortunately, there's nothing in this budget that enthuses me to believe that you will achieve 8% growth and repeat the 8% growth year after year to attain the $5 trillion economy that your economic survey talks about.
You know, I take that point, but wouldn't you give this government the credit for not breaching the fiscal deficit target? They've in fact lowered it by 10 basis points at a time like this when there are worries coming in on the global economy as well, and the temptation to have a higher fiscal deficit was far higher.
That number is suspect. Look at the number they've projected for the year that ended, 2018-19. The interim budget projected it at 3.4. And for the year 2018-19, it's well known that they lost revenue of about 1,60,000 crore. They achieved the target by compressing capital expenditure by nearly 1,30,000 crore. Total expenditure by 1,30,000 crore. And then they moved some expenditure to off budget. Now, if that's the way you achieve your fiscal deficit target, what credibility has the new number 3.3 have? You tell me whether the 3.3 will be achieved by meeting your revenue targets and meeting your expenditure targets. If you meet both targets and achieve 3.3, full marks.
You know, but this government also talks about how, this is an honest fiscal deficit target. There is no rollover in terms of subsidies.
There was no last year? I think you are too kind. They moved a lot of food subsidies to the food corporations borrowing.
So you're not convinced with the fact that there are no off-budget items in this?
I don't know. That will be known only at the end of this year. But for last year, there were off-budget items. Now, if the government tells us we will meet our revenue collection targets, we will meet our expenditure targets, and we will maintain the fiscal deficit, I give full marks to the government.
You know, would you say the problem here is really the quality of the fiscal deficit? Has that been an issue, when you've been...
See, if they had done their expenditure, they would not have achieved the fiscal deficit target of 3.4 or 3.3 last year. So the quality of the fiscal deficit can only be judged if the government says, I will meet my revenue collection targets and I'll meet my expenditure targets.
I also have to ask you the fact that in the interim budget, when the calculations were made, that were made on the basis of a nominal GDP of 11.5%. However, now the nominal GDP estimate that the government is looking at is 12%, yes. And this coming in at a time when the economy is going through a slowdown itself. Would you say that is going to, hurt them in terms of the numbers, in terms of the calculations that they're looking at?
Tell me, how is 12% possible? The economic survey projects the growth rate for 1920 at 7%. It also says inflation will be kept, NPC limit is 4%. So with 7 plus 4, the nominal GDP can't grow by more than 11%. Right. How do you get 12%? You should ask this question of the government.
There's also too much dependence this time around on the non-tax revenues. The direct tax collection target, we have seen the government has revised it downwards as per in terms of their interim budget target. How are you looking at this trend, and is that something that could mean that there is over-dependence in terms of their non-tax revenues, the way the calculations are being done on that front?
Well, there's not too much of a difference in the overall revenue receipts between the interim budget of Mr. Goel and the regular budget. The tax revenues showing a reduction of about
60,000 crores.
60,000 crore.
Yeah.
But they are making it up in non-tax revenue by about 41,000
But isn't this
crore.
a worrisome trend?
That depends. Unless you see the breakup of these numbers, and it's too early for me to have gone through the remaining budget documents. Because overall revenue receipts are not much different. 19,77,000 crore in the interim budget, 19,62,000 crore in the regular budget, a shortfall of only 15,000 crore.
We've seen how in this time the government has increased the divestment target to over 1 lakh crore rupees.
1 lakh, I thought she said.
1.05 lakh crore rupees. That is the divestment target for this year. But despite a lot of talks and promises about strategic divestment, very little work has been done on that. Air India too, the government was not able to sell it the last time it went to market. Would you say this, in terms of divestment, there is a lot of the left hand, the money in the left pocket being shifted to the right
That's
one.
what they did last year.
And is that
The
something?
ONGC, HPCL, so-called disinvestment got them, I think, 40,000 crore, isn't it, if I remember right?
Yeah.
Let them say that the disinvestment will be true disinvestment, which means the government shares will be sold to the public or sold to a private investor. If government shares are sold to another public sector undertaking, well, that's really not disinvestment. I'm not saying this is the first government which did that, but I think this is the first government which has done that on such a scale.
In an environment like this, when there are, of course, worries coming in, not just on slowdown, but global worries as well. Can the government meet this over 1 lakh crore worth of target for divestment that they are setting out, or is it a too ambitious one?
No, it can. If they do your kind of left hand to right hand, of course you can. If there is government holding in one PSU and there's another cash-rich PSU, if that PSU buys the shares, you can achieve 1,05,000. All you need is a couple of big deals like that.
Since we are talking about tax revenues, let me also shift focus on the goods and services tax. The GST calculation that the government is doing, they're projecting a far lower number this time as compared to the interim budget for GST. Does it go on to show that perhaps there is a lot more work that needs to be done with respect to goods and services tax, and B, you yourself have been talking about GST 2.0
Yes.
for a very long time. When can all the states in the GST Council come together and take these hard decisions?
They won't unless they give up their state of denial. I don't speak to state finance ministers. I speak to business persons. I speak to traders. I speak to people who have actually got huge refund spending. I speak to people who have gone to court, and there are so many complaints in court about so many aspects of the GST. So unless this current GST is radically revised into GST 2.0, you will continue to face these problems. What they are trying to do is they are putting Band-Aid on a gaping wound. Now, you need to recognize that your GST law was badly designed, badly drafted, and badly implemented. Once you accept that, you will then revisit the law. Even now, your GSTR Form 2 and GSTR Form 3 are not notified. Every time they come up with some temporary measure and they call it will be a permanent measure. Business, industry, trade are greatly affected by the present GST and the manner in which it is implemented. They are too scared to speak up because the GST inspectors will pounce upon them and they will be subjected to harassment.
So what would be your recipe, as the former finance minister, to fix the current goods and services tax?
It's not the business of the opposition to give recipes. We said we will have a GST 2.0. We said it will be a single rate. we said it will be a moderate rate. But the people
But in
have
the coun-
voted the BJP to power. It's for them to take note of what the people want and implement it.
But in a country like India, you cannot have the same rate for a Hawaii chappal and also
This is a
luxury and
fundamental
expensive products.
fundamental mental block. Don't call it GST. A GST is one rate, period. A one rate means a standard rate with a standard minus and a standard plus to provide for the transition. GST is one rate. Don't give me this Hawaii chappal versus
Luxury items.
aircraft example. Other countries have also got boots and aircraft. Other countries which have implemented GST have also got shoes and aircraft, right?
The government has really been struggling with respect to GST because there is an issue of fake invoices. There are, the e-way bill is yet to.
No, but I thought she said today e-way bill is not necessary.
Yeah, for certain things, but fake invoices has been a big issue that the government is struggling with. But having said that, would you say that the other sectors that have to be brought under the goods and services tax will take a lot more time as the
There's
government?
no mention in the speech, unless I'm wrong. She should have said when she will bring those items under GST. Petroleum products, one part of the construction industry,
Yeah,
electricity and liquor. She should have said that.
Is it something that the Congress-led states will be pushing forth in the next GST council?
We said it in our manifesto. The manifesto binds all Congress-led states. Why should 3 or 4 chief ministers or finance ministers of the Congress push for anything? It's for the government to push for it and then ask the states whether they agree or disagree. If the government pushes for inclusion, I have no doubt that our finance ministers will agree. But you are asking us to be the government. It's the government which should push for these changes.
That was, of course, on on the tax revenue front. Let me shift focus and talk about NBFCs. A lot of steps have been taken in this budget. A lot of new announcements. I would say. I'll not call them steps.
Such as
now the entire NBFC sector, the RBI, the Reserve Bank of India, the Central Bank of India, the central bank will be looking at NBFCs and will be regulating the NBFCs as well as the housing finance space.
So what has that got to do with?
No, I just want.
Lot of steps have been taken.
No, so I'm just asking. Would you say that do you think that these steps are going to perhaps help in dealing with the current mess that's there in the NBFC space?
RBI was already regulating systemically important NBFCs. It's not as though RBI did not regulate any NBFC. In fact, if I remember right, RBI was regulating one category of NBFCs, about 300 or 400 or whatever. Now there are many more. If RBI wishes to regulate, fine. But the problem with NBFCs today is liquidity. Now tell me, where in this budget speech has the government addressed the issue of liquidity in NBFCs?
Is it a liquidity issue or a solvency issue for NBFC?
NBFCs say it is a liquidity issue. Let's take it as a solvency issue. Where have they said, let NBFCs with solvency problem die? Where do they say that? All that they say is, financially sound NBFCs, if they pool their assets and banks buy the pooled assets up to 1 lakh, they will give a one-time 6-month credit guarantee for 10%. Now all this jargon means government will bear the risk for 10,000 crore. You can say that in 6 words instead of all this jargon. But the NBFC issue is not about financially sound NBFCs. The NBFC issue is about a huge number of NBFCs which have faced a liquidity problem.
Would you say it's a bailout by the government?
To whom? Who is being bailed out?
NBFCs?
They are financially sound, so why bail them out? That's what the minister said. Financially sound NBFCs. Then why bail them out?
If they see a loss, then 10% of it will.
But why should a financially sound NBFC have a? It's like saying, I'll be a doctor to you. I'll be a doctor to healthy patients. Why would a healthy patient need a doctor?
So do you think that's it's? I mean, you would say that this is not a step that's perhaps needed.
The problem is different. The problem is liquidity of a large number of NBFCs. save a handful. You have to address that problem.
You know, while I get that point, the other issue, and I remember when the Punjab National Bank fraud case came out, a lot of questions were being raised on the supervisory forbearance of the RBI, whether the RBI, has enough bandwidth to regulate all PSU banks and the kind of powers they have. Now, additional responsibility has been given to the RBI to regulate the NBFC space as well as the housing finance space. How would you look at it?
I don't know what the RBI, was it consulted or have they concurred? I don't know. Let's see how this measure will be implemented. I assume the RBI was consulted, and I assume the RBI has agreed to take over regulation. In fact, the criticism against RBI was, and Dr. Ruchi Patel said it even yesterday, that the RBI did not regulate as much as it should have. So if the RBI is now saying we will regulate housing finance companies, we will regulate NBFCs, so be it.
He was also the deputy governor at the time.
Of course.
When
So it was actually self-criticism.
Okay, let me shift focus. Since we are talking about RBI, the government has not factored in any transferable surplus from the RBI. Would you say that this is going to give them any amount of cushion if that money were to come in once the Bimal Jalan panel report gets
I don't know what the
finalized?
Bimal Jalan committee will recommend. They have taken credit for the normal dividends which RBI gives, and I think that will be quite substantial. I don't think, and quite rightly, I don't think they could have taken credit for a share of the accumulated surpluses. But that has to await the Bimal Jalan committee report.
One more issue that the markets, they were pretty unnerved about was the whole sovereign borrowing, announcement that has been made. The government says it's a huge opportunity. This is something that you yourself wanted to do when you were the finance minister. How do you look at something like this, and what is the kind of impact that this is going to have on the Indian economy?
Sovereign borrowing?
Yeah, they have announced a sovereign borrowing.
What is the sovereign borrowing then?
It's there in the budget where they're saying that they will allow sovereign borrowing.
I didn't notice it.
This is something that you also in your...
I didn't notice it. You point out to me where it is and then we will comment.
Okay, we'll
we move on and
we'll come back to that in just a while. But on the whole, sir, since you're calling it an insipid budget, you're also talking about how there are key schemes where...
Just a moment. Are you referring to paragraph 103?
I think.
When sovereign external debt. But that's always been less than 5%. So that's not a new feature. Then they say we'll start raising a part of our borrowing in external markets. This will also have beneficial impact on demand situation for the government securities and domestic. What's wrong? If somebody abroad, there is an appetite for government bonds. FIIs who come to India do invest in government bonds, but there are limits to that. If they are going to float these bonds abroad, so be it. Like, for example, what do they call these bonds which SBI floated abroad? They floated some bonds in Japan, and if there is an appetite, yes. But whether government will attract enough investment in its bonds in foreign markets remains to be seen.
Could it have some sort of a counter?
Samurai bond or something we call it.
Could it have some sort of a counter
and the
impact
masala
on
bond or
masala bonds?
This was by SBI.
I don't know.
I think it's by SBI. I'm not sure. I can't remember. But if the government is willing to float a bond, let it.
But could this sovereign borrowing that the government is now talking about have any kind of an impact, like an adverse impact on the Indian rupee as well?
But why should it? If you are raising, you see, government has to borrow. It borrows in the Indian market, the bond rate will be
Right.
decided by the Indian market. If it borrows in a foreign market, it might get better rates, but how much it will borrow, I can't say.
All right. So before I let you go, I have to ask you the last question, and that has to be on, the first paragraph of your statement where you're saying that this is for the first time that we've seen in the budget, no attention to detail was given to key schemes like the midday meal schemes. Why would you say that, and what is it that the government needs to do in a bid to perhaps focus on these key schemes that are there in the economy?
What is a budget speech for? If everything is there in the budget document, you don't need a speech at all. MPs, officers, institutional investors, capital market stakeholders can all spend the next 2-3 days poring over the budget documents and collecting all this data. But why do you make a budget speech? You make a budget speech for the people. People who don't have access to these documents, nor can they understand these documents. You have to tell the poor people what is the allocation for Maganrega, what is the allocation for midday meal scheme, what is the allocation for minorities, what is the allocation for scheduled castes. That's why a budget speech is necessary. Otherwise, you can place a budget without a budget speech. In fact, many countries, budgets are placed or approved without a budget speech. The US does not have a budget speech. They present a budget and discuss it and decide. But a budget speech in India has a purpose. The purpose being to speak to the people and explain to the people what government intends to do with some numbers which will reassure people. But for the first time in my knowledge, that the budget speech does not give what is the total revenue, what is the total expenditure, what is the fiscal deficit, what are the allocations, program-wise, what are the allocations section-wise.
But those are always details that people can read in the fine print,
Yeah,
isn't it?
sure. I'll go back to my constituency and ask the farmer who's tilling 2 acres of land, why are you asking this question? Go to the budget document and read.
Okay, I get your point on that. But on that note, sir, thanks for taking your time out and speaking to us.
Thank you.
Thank you.